Hey, Immanuel, we wanted to bring you in on a conversation. Pastor Chad has been leading this for more than a year now, and it centers on what are our values at Immanuel and what's our vision and what are we going to do in the future. And this conversation is so vitally important. In one sense, of course, every church around the world has the same mission, but in a very different sense, we're all very unique. And so what makes Immanuel unique in our community and what we offer and what God is calling us to? And so we just wanted to have a conversation, Pastor Chad and Tom Southern and myself, and then we want to get your input as well. What do you think? What do you value about Immanuel? What do you think we should be doing in the future? And so, Pastor Chad, I mean, as a pastor, we want to follow Jesus, of course, and do what he does. And I thought your devotion was just really, really perfect for starting this. And so, if you wanted to give us some context. And
Sure. So as I look back in the Gospel of Mark chapter 1, which is really recording for us the very beginning of Jesus' Galilean ministry, and it shows him healing all night and doing miracles and being just bombarded with people and doing all kinds of amazing things in people's lives. But at the end of that arduous day, he disappears into the hills until his disciples go looking for him in the morning, and they are asking him and expecting him to come back and do more healings, or like, there's still more people there, let's stay here. And Jesus says, no, that's not why I was sent. I was sent to do something else. I was sent to go to all of the towns and the villages in the Galilee and to preach my message in their synagogues and in their communities. And so what I learned from that is Jesus knew to say no to things, including amazing things, good things. Healing a sick person's an amazing thing to do, or spending time with lonely people or widows or orphan children. All the things he was doing, there was nothing wrong with it at all, except that was not his vision, and it was not his mission, and it was not part of his core values. Like, it's something he did at times, but it was not ultimately his why. And so I think in a church, in a congregation, we also get bombarded with people. Not only
we get stuck on really good things.
We get bombarded not only with members of the congregation or those who are part of our school, but also our community. And they ask for a lot of good things or expect a lot of good things that on paper you would never say that's a bad idea or we shouldn't do that, except we can only do so much. So what are we really good at? What can we be excellent at? What's the personality of our congregation? What's the personality of its leadership and its staff and its boards? What are we really about? So then we can all, whether it's a lay leader or a volunteer, all the way to the senior pastor, what do we have permission to say no to and not feel guilty about or feel ashamed about? And also, what can we be empowered to say yes to and pursue without, again, any kind of guilt or shame or anything, because we know that's what we're about. That's our why. Who are we? What's our purpose? And what I really wanted to get at was, what are our core values? So then when a ministry opportunity comes up, we can ask ourselves, does this fit in with our mission? Does this serve our values? And then not just we can answer yes, because as you alluded to, many ways there's a common ground with churches, like, preach the gospel,
kind of have the same
make
mission,
disciples, baptize. You're going to be able to answer yes, but it lets you go down a road like, okay, then how is it doing this value? What value is it really highlighting, and how is it hitting that value, and how will it accentuate that value, and how will that value become even more powerful, more prominent, more understood? How will it be contagious? How will it catch on in the culture? And so it gives the leadership and those who look at what are we going to do in 6 months? What are we doing for a year? What are we doing 5 years out? It gives us the framework to work within, instead of just saying yes to everything, because again, we get lots of emails and lots of requests for things that are great, but it's not who we are.
Yeah, and I think in such a good and healthy way, it really affirms that we are one part of the whole church, and we don't have to do it all, and God's not expecting us to do it all. So
Exactly.
if we can really focus on what are we going to do excellent and contribute to the whole church, that's going to make the whole church better. And there's going to be other churches out there that are going to do some
Right.
other things really good.
Which does mean,
and
as the body of Christ, we're okay if our no is someone else's yes, and that needs to be a yes for you. Like, we're okay with that. Like, we don't have to beat ourselves up about it or feel like we need to do something different, like, because we may be someone else's yes that they need. And so, yes, very much working in concert with the whole body and the diversity that exists within congregations, even in our own church body, but even the church universal. Some of this really began all the way back in August of 2022 when we had an all-staff meeting. And in that all-staff meeting, we kind of did some brainstorming, and staff took Post-it notes, and they kind of were instructed on yellow Post-it notes to write, what do they value about Immanuel? What try to keep it one word, no more than 2 or 3 words, just in a summary kind of way. What do they value about it? What do they experience out of it? Then we had some blue Post-it notes where they also brainstormed, what do you think a complete outsider, someone that just drives by on 21 Mile Road or Romeo Plank, or someone who's just had some kind of very brief interaction with the church or school in the community, what do you think they think we value? And so we did that and kind of looked through that, and then it was followed by 2 more meetings with the lead staff of Immanuel, as well as the leadership boards, which includes the Board of Education, the school board, and the Board of Elders, and the church council. And we, Tom took us through many exercises over many hours to kind of whittle that down and do our own exercises to try to find out what our values are.
Yeah. Tom, how have you brought the lay leadership in on that process, and what questions have you asked of them, and what things have you set up to really kind of get to? I mean, these are leaders from the school board, the Board of Education. These are the elders, your spiritual leaders, along with the pastors. I mean, this is your church council, the ones who oversee the whole organization. So, like, how do you bring them in?
Yeah. So what we ended up doing as part of the 2 big meetings that Pastor Chad referred to with our lay boards and some of the called staff was that we brought them in and we basically asked a whole bunch of questions. We used a methodology.
He really
set
did.
Of questions.
He just gave us big sticky notes.
Big
and was
sticky
write
notes,
stuff
poster
as fast as you can.
with 0 direction.
Until your hands fall off. Just write.
Just write, guys. Yeah. What we wanted to going in with that was not just ask just random questions, but we wanted to ask very, very targeted questions. And so we did that using a methodology. And I'm a big fan of reading the works of great thought leaders across industry. What questions were they asking of the organizations who they've worked with, who they've spoken to? We looked at questions that have been raised by thought disruptors, so people like Clayton Christensen and Bob Mesta, and we put those questions before the boards and before our staff. And so on meeting 1, for example, we tried to tackle 3 of the big heavies. Meeting 1 focused on one of the big questions was, why do we exist?
If we were to suddenly vanish, what would this community miss? Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And I think at one point we said, it's okay to give us the churchy answer to begin with, which is okay. That's everybody's natural tendency when you're asking that why do we exist question in a church. But we took them through a 5 whys exercise. So you'd give the first answer and they go, well, why is that important? Well, why is that important? Why is that important? And part of that was meant to drill us down into some themes, which would drive towards the ultimate finding of which core values might actually exist.
Yeah.
So after we spent a good amount of time with lots of yellow Post-it notes and some Post-it boards, we asked
and coffee
and lots
and
of
donuts.
Coffee. We made sure we had brain breaks in there. We asked the question, how do we behave? As I think you both have already referenced, it was how does the community see us in that regard? So what behaviors does the community see, right? then as a third question, we said, well, what do we actually do? You know, and so
there's things we imagine we do, and then there's things of what do we actually do.
And it was fun going through those three questions. I mean, I found it fun. I wasn't sitting at the tables. I was just walking around making sure everybody was filling out the pages, right? But it was fun for us to kind of go through it and understand that we were breaking down a lot of both cognitive and emotional biases as we were going through it. So we were moving past the idea of, well, this is my expectation of my church, and this is what I want us to be. You know, because we were so diversified at those tables and going through these deep questions and having really good conversation. We were spending a good half hour, or in some cases 45 minutes on some of these one-line questions. It was I think a good activity. But then we also moved into this idea of, if you're going to talk about core values, you have to also understand what core values are not. All right. And so there's three types that we talked about. One is permission to play. So if somebody if Joe Smith were to walk in the front door, what is our expectation, not just as leaders of the church, but as just a common churchgoer? What's our expectation?
Someone who calls Immanuel home.
Yeah, and it was again fascinating, I think, for me, and fascinating for everybody else in the room just to kind of break down that.
Well, really, do you want to expand a little more? Like, what do you mean by permission to play?
Yeah, so it's
like give an example of what that would be.
I'll kind of tell you what we ended up landing on was that it was like, what is the base expectation of somebody walking in and participating in that organization, right? And going through a number of different just single words or short phrases, we landed on the biggest permission to play value is curiosity or truth seeker.
Yeah, seeking.
Yeah, and it wasn't like we don't expect Joe Smith that's never met Jesus in his life to come in and just fall in love with Jesus on day one. We want him to come and be curious. Something about the Holy Spirit has just kind of nudged them and is curious and go, I want to go see who is this Jesus guy that's out there.
Yeah. And likewise, like, we value, if you've been a Christian 50 years, like, to still, you're always learning and to be curious more than to say, I just know it all. I'm just here. I'm filling a seat. Yeah.
And so, like, if you think about just differentiating a permission to play value from a core value, it's not the same. A core value is something that's foundational. It's something that's an absolute cornerstone of the organization. Permission to play just says, you're cool to come in the door.
Yeah.
Right. Then we also talked about accidental values, and accidental values are those things that they just kind of become part of the culture of an organization. 99% of the time, as the name indicates, it was by accident, and then sometimes, as we've seen across.
Sometimes it's a little gut check.
Well, COVID. COVID caused accidental values to happen everywhere. It doesn't matter what industry it was in. They popped up everywhere. And in the moment, those accidental values might allow you to get through a moment, but again, you have to come back to that central question: does it honor the values of the organization as a whole? Is it foundational?
Is it part of our why?
Yeah. And then the third big question we looked at, or third part of the values we looked at, was aspirational values. So again, not the cornerstone stuff, but like, this is what we want to be in the future, and it's behaviors that you aspire to. So I think, at least in session one, taking everyone, all the boards and the leadership staff through that, I think it was a good exercise. It we've used that term, bias a lot, and I think we just kind of walking through some of the cognitive biases, and whether it's anchoring bias or blind spot bias. We spent a lot of time talking about blind spot bias in that session, but I think it was good, because then that allowed us to have something brewing in our brains for the next month until we got together again. Yeah.
Well, and I just loved how the conversation was so open and honest and good and encouraging. Like, people were just kind of freely shared what they experienced, and there was such a variety of experiences as far as leadership and how long they've been in Immanuel and their backgrounds, and it was a great great time to get the whole kind of representation of the whole organization together. So it was really neat. Yeah. So where do you want to go from here then? Because we've done some of that groundwork. You've got, I would say, a lot of data at this point.
Lots of data.
But now you have to figure out what do you do with that data?
Yeah.
So
we spent
what's the timeline too?
Yeah. So we spent a lot of session 2 talking through that. It was it was still interactive, but it was more about this is what the process looks like going forward. And so as part of that, we had to answer, the next set of 3 questions. As Pastor Chad's figured out, I like asking questions. It's okay, you can nod on that one. There's and so when we talk about some of the core questions that Lencioni asked, his next one was, how will we succeed? Right? And so you start to understand just with that question that it's not just about the core values. It becomes organizational clarity.
Yeah. And it's not just getting by surviving, but like thriving and succeeding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. And so then the next question that pops up is, what's most important right now? Right? And so again, it takes those values and keeps refining and defining. And then you get to a final question of who will do what. And so it becomes, it's not saying that, this minister does this action at this time, but it provides clarity around the mission of that minister or that board or that team or that social group or that small group. It provides clarity around what they are called to do. So we've asked our lead staff to look at in the next month or so is using a model that we did on the Board of Elders, creating one big thematic goal that we can work on, creating 2, 3, maybe 4 defining objectives that point towards that thematic goal, and then having what we call standard operating objectives, not procedures but objectives, and those objectives all have behaviors tied to them. You can't just put 3 words on a board and say those are our core values, we're going to do that. Well, no, you have to have behaviors tied to those values.
Right, and it not only provides clarity, but it enables us as leaders, as the organization, to provide a scorecard, how we're doing, are we red, are we yellow, are we green? It's measurable, so you can define success, and that keeps us from, again, kind of just generically having something pie in the sky, like we make disciples and baptize. Well, okay, once you start getting down to core behaviors, then you can say, are you actually doing X, Y, and Z, and how well are you doing X, Y, and Z to make those disciples or to bring people through the waters of baptism? So it brings in accountability into the leadership. It enables us to actually know how we're doing moving towards our mission and our vision.
Yeah, and to keep it simple enough so that every single person in the congregation knows it. It's not just a staff thing, but it's like it's actions and values for every single person.
It definitely needs to be branded. So be on the lookout for cool T-shirts and banners and posters and
cut off hoodies,
website designs and all that. But because it definitely needs to become part of vocabulary and language, because then that also creates a common language amongst the people at Immanuel. So and that's invaluable to have a shared language.
When you start talking around the ideas of that shared language, one of the things that Lencioni brings up is this idea of a playbook, and it's exactly that, where all of us can basically carry around some type of document, whether it's in the form of a card, a cube. I mean, one church has done a cube, pretty cool, where they have their values on it, but it also talks about the mission, talks about the vision. But it becomes just language that you're always using, and that language doesn't change the DNA of who you are as a church. It actually accentuates it and allows you to understand what is mission critical all the time. And as Pastor Chad said, it gives you a lot of room to say yes, but also when you need to say no, it
keeps it focused.
It keeps it focused, and there's a good, clear understanding of why.
Yeah.
I think you asked about timelines, and I think I maybe dodged the question a little bit, but so there's going to be.
We did just finish Holy Week. It is coming up toward the end of school year, so
nobody's busy.
Nobody's busy at all, right? I think we're looking for
but,
a lot of this to wrap up.
I mean, all jokes aside, why this conversation is so important is because we're all busy, but let's be busy about the stuff that we need to be busy about. So it's so easy to get sidetracked.
Yeah, we have some soft target dates out there where we'd like to have an example of that playbook and of the values of the mission of the mission. So that's sometime in the month of May, and then have it presented to the various boards so that the boards and the staff, we absolutely want to have the school staff involved in this as well. And then hopefully as we get towards the middle part of the summer, we can really look to, as you both have said, finding some of those good cutoff hoodies that, just could you imagine an army of Pastor Chads with the cutoff hoodies running around with?
The world is not ready for that. Macomb is not ready for that.
Yeah, but having that kind of stuff, because one of the things we also talked about at one of those meetings was, when you walk into the church, your values should be screamed from everywhere. Mm-hmm. Whether you see the behavior of leaders walking around, that value should be present. Mm-hmm. If it's our marketing materials on the walls, I know it's weird to talk about marketing in a church, but still, you are talking about who you are, what you represent. I think people will see more and more of that stuff. They'll be able to see it, sense it. Mm-hmm. You're going to see more of it as we get into the program year and navigate through that.
So thanks for joining in, and continue to keep this whole process in your prayers. You are a part of this process, and you're going to see more of this in the fall as we really solidify and focus things. And also post in the comments 1 or 2 words of things that you love about Immanuel, that you value about Immanuel, maybe a ministry or something that's really impacted you, because you're a part of this conversation, and you're a part of what God is doing here at Immanuel in Macomb. So thanks for tuning in.